edition of Best of the Best here at Best Academy High School. Today we will be interviewing and talking with two authors, Jake Austin and Yuval Taylor. They are here to give us information on their book, Darkest America, Black Minstrelsy, From Slavery to Hip Hop. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and let's get right into it, okay?
Thank you. Thanks. What got us interested in this was in 2005, there was Dave Chappelle was filming the last season of his television show. He didn't know it was going to be his last season. He had just signed a very long contract. And he was doing a skit called Racial Pixies. And what this skit was about was the idea that in real life, when an ethnic minority comes across a stereotype, in this case, he's on a plane and the only thing that they can feed him is fried chicken. And he then portrayed a racial pixie, like a little sort of devil on the shoulder, who is encouraging him to embrace these stereotypes. And for that skit, what he did was he wore blackface makeup. And he wore the kind of costume that a minstrel performer would wear. And these were performers that started out in the 1800s, and they wore blackface. And just before I kind of get into what that is, when he put this black makeup on his face, and what it is you wear totally pitch black makeup and then kind of white around your mouth and around your eyes so you look like a cartoon. And when he did this, he saw the staff members laughing, and there was some white staff members that were laughing. And even though he had written this skit, and it was a skit that was critical, it was saying that these stereotypes are painful, he just couldn't deal with this person laughing at him. That's when he decided to quit the show. He had a $55 million contract, and it was not worth it to him to like feel this bad. He told Oprah Winfrey that was the only laugh he ever got that he felt ashamed of, that he wasn't comfortable with. And what he was referring to when he wore this makeup was minstrel shows.
Well, could you tell us, start off by giving us a little bit of history, what were minstrel shows? Well,
initially, in the 1840s, minstrel shows became incredibly popular, and what it was a show where white performers would put on black makeup to pretend to be black people. And it would be a 3-act show, a comedy section, a variety section, and then a play. And the most kind of influential part was the comedy section, where you have kind of clowns. You know, I mean, it's sort of like clown makeup, but the jokes are based on stereotypes about blacks, about laziness and not being smart.
Buffoonery?
Buffoonery. Okay. Buffoonery. And some physical comedy, and also some specific things about stealing chickens or eating watermelon. These are just the stereotypes, and they would use it. It would be all white performers doing it, and it became the most popular form of entertainment in America. Without any question, I mean, there obviously was no television and movies or radio in the middle 1800s, but this was a phenomenon. And then,
would these be traveling acts? Would these people go from city to city, or would there be minstrels located in each city?
Well, it's both. There were troops that would go from city to city, and then there were later in minstrelsy history, each city had its own minstrel troops. Now, what our book is about is black minstrels. These were African Americans who took the blackface thing that the white people had started and did it themselves. And they were billed as more authentic, more true to life than the whites. A lot of them were former slaves who then, after emancipation, became comedians and went around the country putting on these shows. The Darkest America is the name of one of these minstrel shows, one of the most successful ones of the 1890s. And they would do exactly the same thing as the white performers would do. They would act lazy and buffoonish, and you know, the stock characters of Sambo, Jim Crow, the Coon. Those were all the acts that these minstrels, black minstrels, would do. And what we're looking at in this book is how this tradition of wearing blackface, or sometimes not wearing blackface, but still having these negative stereotypes, enacting these negative stereotypes that most African Americans feel ashamed of, how they thrived and how they continue to thrive into the 21st century.
One of the things that I noticed in your book is that the black minstrels were very popular. Not only with white audiences, but they were popular with black audiences.
That's right.
After emancipation, 1865, when the slaves are freed, the black minstrel show usurps the white minstrel show. It becomes the most popular entertainment in America. Yeah. Whites and blacks want to see these shows. And I mean, the reasons people like these shows, I mean, there's several. One is simply that these were incredibly talented entertainers. I mean, these were really good singers and comedians and actors, the musicians.
Acrobats, jugglers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. There was just variety. It was definitely a good show.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons that critics and a lot of white audiences might have been impressed was the idea, like you've all said, about this being authentic. People, when the white performers would pretend to be black, they were claiming, and this wasn't true, but they were claiming that these were the kinds of songs and these were the kind of jokes that black people told, and we're going to...
On the plantation.
We're going to bring this to you. So the idea that blacks who had lived on plantations were doing it seemed more real, but it wasn't. These weren't real.
Yeah.
Like, these songs were not, were written by just songwriters, white songwriters, or even the ones, or black songwriters, but they weren't based on, ancient songs. It wasn't based on reality. But that didn't. But the thing is, it was the most popular entertainment. So I mean, people loved this, and people did think these performers were great. So for the black audiences, even though they knew that this wasn't reality, they were very proud that they had become, that this was the most popular entertainment. I mean, there was a pride that audiences took in these performers.
So there's another thing going on too, and that the performance space is a space free from oppression. When these actors were up on stage, there was no overseer, there were no policemen, there was no master. It was just a bunch of guys having a good time, and even if they were perpetuating negative stereotypes, they were acting happy. They were acting free, and the kind of peculiar thing is even though they were supposed to be representing the plantation, they didn't act like slaves. They didn't have to work hard. And there was no work actually done on stage. They didn't show them working. They showed them having a good time.
Well, let me, as a history teacher, I'm often amazed at some of the things that have actually taken place. But I want to ask you about, because I want to make the transition from slavery to hip-hop. There's a controversy going on right now, maybe in the black community, maybe across the country, but you have people like Spike Lee on one side and Tyler Perry on the other. And the question is, are the Medea movies a new form of minstrel shows?
Well, even at the beginning, even in the 1860s, there were African-American critics and intellectuals like Frederick Douglass who attacked these shows. But there had also always been African-American writers and critics who defended elements of it, And what's happening with, this particular case,
it's the same. Yeah.
It's, Spike Lee, when he made these accusations, he said that Tyler Perry was guilty of coonery and buffoonery. And Tyler Perry eventually does respond, and he's got two responses. One is that he kind of categorizes Spike Lee as a kind of Harlem elite, like from the Harlem Renaissance, that he doesn't understand the South. For him to try and tell people in the South what's funny or what's good, he doesn't have any place doing that. And the other thing he says is that you really don't have any place telling an audience what to like. I mean, he's kind of saying let the market decide. Since people like this, that's okay. Now, obviously, people aren't always going, people don't eat the healthiest food. Like the most popular thing doesn't mean that it's good.
Best thing for you.
But he, Tyler Perry does not address specifically whether he's working on this tradition. But the fact is there are certain elements of his shows that definitely do take some jokes and some things that were absolutely made popular in minstrel shows.
But then there are other elements that are not, and just the fact that the Medea movies came out of a theatrical tradition,
right.
They came out of plays, and these plays were designed and performed for exclusively African American audiences. They were not meant to be shown to whites, and that is not part of the minstrel tradition. The minstrel tradition was almost always had a mixed audience until the 20th. Throughout the 19th century, there were always whites in the audience. And so that's a departure.
Well, excuse me. You're saying that blacks and whites were able to attend these shows at the same time?
At the same time,
Separate
seating, but at the same time together.
Separate seating, but almost always. I mean,
Almost always there were mixed
in the
audiences.
North, there would always be sections. But even in black theaters, when they were playing in the all-black theaters, there would be whites that would attend as well for these shows.
Yeah.
Can you give us a couple of names or examples of some of the premier minstrels, black minstrels?
Billy Kersands was a really famous minstrel performer. He was one of the things that minstrels did was exaggerate their facial features. Billy Kersands not only had the bulging eyes, he had this enormous mouth that he could fit like 2 or 3 billiard balls in. One of his acts was putting an entire cup and saucer into his mouth. Then there was Ernest Hogan, who wrote a lot of the coon songs and was also a really important minstrel performer. In the 20th century, Burt Williams was the greatest black comedian of the first half of the 20th century, and he performed in blackface as well. And he did something completely different in that instead of doing these broad gestures and broad grins, he played a really sorrowful, down and out guy. Everything possible that bad could happen to anyone happened to him. And this gave some pathos and humanity to his character.
Sounds a little bit like Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah,
Well, that's the
very
thing.
much.
The
Very
only
much
reason,
Charlie Chaplin.
the only reason that people don't know about Burt Williams today is because he wore blackface.
Yeah.
And the fact is, he was just about the most popular American entertainer at the time. He was the recording industry just started. He had hit records like nobody else. There was also the sheet music industry. He was a top sheet music seller. He made movies. He was a superstar.
He was a superstar on Broadway. I mean, he was the most popular Broadway
He's the most
actor.
popular Broadway star. And
But people ignore him now because he wore blackface.
well, it's not just because, it's literally because you can't represent him without showing the blackface. People like Charlie Chaplin and W.C. Fields, who was on stage with Burt Williams, when I was a kid, I don't know about today, but you would always see caricatures of them, like there'd be drawings of them, and you were supposed to recognize these people because they were superstars, 50 years ago, but you kind of understood what they looked like, or Marilyn Monroe or Elvis, these icons. But because he wore blackface, they could never make an icon out of him, so he kind of gets erased right after he dies.
Okay, let's retrace for a minute. We're saying that minstrels, the show started after the Civil War for the
black performers.
For the black performers. That the minstrel show had performers the white performers were in blackface. That is, they took cork black and covered their faces, highlighted their lips and their eyes, etc. Put on wigs.
Sometimes,
wore exaggerated clothing.
Right.
Then the blacks come in and basically do the same thing.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
But they take the art form a little higher. Would that be correct? Or
Sometimes. I mean,
So it could take it a little lower.
Well, you're a history teacher, so I mean, you understand that the thing about history is you only know the best people.
Right.
But you got to assume that the people that we don't know about were mediocre. So we got to assume that most of them were not outstanding, and the ones we know about. Like, we know about the brilliant ones. There were absolutely some performers that came out of this that were brilliant. They also, there were more dance innovators in the black minstrel tradition than in the white minstrel tradition.
Yeah.
And there was something called the cakewalk, which became the biggest phenomenon around the world that was started in, the black minstrel shows kind of really did this. Burt Williams' partner was kind of a master of this. And this was just a very exaggerated walk you would do with couples sometimes, and people would have contests, like people would try and imitate it. It was, this really elegant, like people now think of it as like sort of a clownish walk, but it wasn't.
Right.
People didn't think of it like that
Right.
then. People couldn't believe how elegant and beautiful these kind of struts dancing that they had
Kind of like
invented was.
Michael Jackson with the moonwalk,
You know,
only in reverse.
In reverse a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of it, I mean, you would think of some of it as a kind of strutting. I mean, this is, again, I'm going too far back, but you know, like George Jefferson, you know, the way when he would walk into a room, he would have like this kind of strut.
Right.
You know,
He had an attitude.
and it was, you know, working that into a kind of dance. But also the tap dancers and the acrobatic dancers, I mean, a lot of that, I think, excelled in the black shows more than in the white shows.
Okay, so we've got a historical perspective now. We know that it started for blacks, particularly after the Civil War, run through probably early 20th century.
Well,
As minstrel shows per se, we don't have them now, right?
Well, just to, I mean, I don't want to, they stopped being the most popular entertainment after the early 20th century.
Okay.
But there were still touring black minstrel shows at least until the 60s
Really?
in the South. Yeah, there's, they were still doing blackface. They just weren't in the mainstream, but they were playing to mixed audiences around the country, tent shows in the South, all black shows. I mean, so it did exist. It just fell out of the mainstream, but you could still see this until at least the early 60s.
Well, your title says from slavery to hip hop.
Right.
So I teach a hip hop generation.
Okay.
All right, my kids are locked into rap, they're locked into hip hop, etc. What would be examples of?
Well, okay, I mean, the only example where you've got somebody who is absolutely, without any question, drawing upon the minstrel tradition to create his own character would be Flavor Flav, who, you know, was a rapper 20 years ago, and now he's a reality star, and that's been several years. But where hip-hop really comes in is not necessarily what the performers are doing, but what the performers are being accused of doing.
Oh.
So for like the gangster rappers, we know when NWA in the late 80s and early 90s, when this started coming up, a lot of black critics wanted to call them minstrels, sambos, coons, and they would use these kind of as an attack.
Okay.
And it, you know, it was an attack because they really felt that this was a damaging thing. It wasn't a bad thing for them to do, but the fact is these particular rappers were perpetuating negative stereotypes, but they were not perpetuating the same negative stereotypes. They were perpetuating stereotypes of violence and misogyny and criminality, you know, very dangerous criminality, you know, murder and, you know, drug cartels, as opposed to stealing a chicken. You know, I mean, that's a different thing. So it wasn't an exact thing. However, more recently, a lot of the Southern rappers are accused of minstrelsy for different reasons. The reason the Southern rappers are accused of it, in part, is because they embrace their Southernness. And that strikes some people as something that you're not supposed to do. You know, they'll exaggerate their accents, you know, their drawls, or their, you know, the slang, which in a way that some people think sounds like dialect in a minstrel show.
So somebody like maybe Lil Wayne coming out of New Orleans,
Right,
who
exactly.
uses that, or,
And the other thing about Lil Wayne is that minstrels wanted to be clowns. They wanted to be funny. And the gangster rappers did not want to be perceived as funny at all. They would always say, I ain't no, you know, MF joke. That was like, everybody said that, you know? But now there's a kind of shamelessness to somebody like Lil Wayne. He doesn't mind being funny. He doesn't mind acting crazy. He is not, his dignity is not based on him, you know, standing up straight and dressing, you know. He'll act really wild. And some people see this kind of dignity, you know, his relationship with dignity as something different than we've seen in the past, and they're relating that to minstrelsy. He also, because of his grill, because he would have these teeth, you know, with diamonds in it, he always would like grin really big, like showing his teeth, and that is one of the symbols of minstrelsy, is you know, showing your teeth really big like that. So people, when they accuse the contemporary people of that, it's a little bit different. But you know, it's not entirely fair either, but there's something to it, you know.
Okay. We look too at various actors and others in the field who may fall prey to being perceived as minstrels.
Right.
Could you talk about that just a little bit?
I guess there's, well, I mean, in the book we're talking about J.J. in Good Times is one actor who's
Okay.
who was called out for being, quote, coonish.
Old Dynamite himself.
Yep.
Right.
Dynamite.
And that was an interesting case because
Yeah.
both of the lead actors on the show, the adults who played his parents, quit the show because their son, the actor who was playing their son, Jimmy Walker, who became the star of the show, was doing what they felt was a minstrel act. And both of them quit, and then the producers were only able to get one of them to come back with promises that they would completely change how this character was perceived. And, you know, this is a guy who just thought what he was doing was really funny. And when he was in New York, he was performing for Black Panthers, doing the same kind of jokes. You know, he was one of the comedians that would entertain at Black Panther functions, and none of them told him, you know, you couldn't do this. So, you know, but he was absolutely, whether he knew it or not, drawing upon certain kind of wide-eyed, big-grinned, absurd comedy that wasn't based in dignity, that was kind of shameless. So whether he knew it or not, he was definitely drawing on this tradition.
I've got to ask this question, okay? And please, no offense.
There's no offense.
How did two young white guys like yourselves get drawn into something that is so definitely black? Or am I wrong? Is it not definitely black?
Oh, it's definitely black. But what we've been writing and both of us have been writing about black culture for decades. You know, I've done books on slavery and slave narratives, and Jake has been writing about African American performers in his magazine Rocktober, and so we're not strangers to the African American traditions.
But, yeah, I mean, also, I mean, the thing is, it's a very uncomfortable subject. It's something that makes us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It makes us feel kind of bad, but you know, because it makes almost everybody feel uncomfortable talking about this stuff, people haven't written about it that much. So even though it was difficult to write about and difficult to research and difficult to look at this stuff and think about this stuff, it was also an opportunity to research things that people had not researched enough, to actually go,
That's right.
you know, it was an open door. This book hadn't been written
Right.
because it's a hard subject to deal with.
Yeah.
So even though it was as hard for us as it would be for, you know, anybody to look at this stuff, we were excited to discover things that we didn't know and that we hadn't read in all the books that we were reading, you know?
Is there a bottom line? Is there a statement to be made about minstrel?
I think there's a continuum here, just like in almost anything. You've got some things that are a lot more minstrelish than others,
Okay.
and you've got some great entertainers who are doing stuff that make a lot of people feel ashamed. You've got some really talented writers who are criticizing black minstrelsy. Spike Lee made a movie that was very anti-black minstrelsy called Bamboozled.
Bamboozled, right.
And the whole subject was black minstrelsy, and it's an incredibly powerful movie, a really brilliant film. And so that, you know, you've got this huge spectrum. I don't think there's a line that can be drawn in the sand that says this is minstrelsy and this isn't. It's just something that almost every African American entertainer has to deal with as part of the legacy of African American entertainment.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking of a show that the Wayman brothers did, In Living Color.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me as I read your book and then looked back on that different production, there were definitely some strains of the minstrel tradition in Living Color, both black and white. All right, but that's not the only show. There seemed to me to be Flip Wilson's show. I'm trying to think of something that's on now, but I'm seeing this strand flow through almost everything that we do.
Well, I mean, when you say bottom line, do you mean like sum up the book, or do you mean what's the lowest somebody can go before it's too far?
No, I mean pretty much sum up the book.
Okay.
Because I think we can go as low as high as we want.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we kind of really find out in the book is that the more you learn, the more complicated it gets rather than the clearer. Like, so the idea that this has to be bad and this has to be good and this has to stop and this has to start, the more you know, the less clear that is. But one thing that does come up is there is kind of something really important that can happen with context. And context can determine whether something is okay or is absolutely not okay. And there was a television show, the first all-black cast television show was called Amos and Andy.
Yeah.
Now, this was a show that was very popular with audiences, and the actors on it were incredibly talented and very funny. But this was the dawn of the civil rights era, and this was not something that could be on TV. These actors should have been able to be on TV because they deserved it. They were as funny as the people on I Love Lucy. They were as funny as the people on The Honeymooners. They should have been able to be stars, but they couldn't right then, because when you're trying to change, the South, and you're trying to get, voting laws changed, you're trying to get, you can't have,
Trying to change perception.
you can't have this being shown. Bill Cosby said that at his house they loved that show and they would imitate them, but he didn't want any white people seeing it.
Yeah.
And so that couldn't be on. So that show might have been okay. Another time that show might have been okay if there were 5 other shows on with African Americans, being represented in different ways, but it couldn't be the only show. But
So it was taken off the air.
so it's taken off the air. But we were down in New Orleans, and at 9 a.m. on Mardi Gras Day, they have an all-black, blackface parade, the Zulu parade.
parade, yeah.
The Zulu parade. And when you're down there, nobody's thinking about minstrelsy. They're thinking about tradition. They're thinking that their father took them to this parade when they were kids, and his father took them. They're not, even though they're wearing bones through their noses, and they've got white
And
lips.
it's interesting you should bring it up,
Yeah.
because I was fortunate enough to have done at least 2 Mardi Gras, and had seen the Zulu, and did not make the connection until I read.
You do not make the connection to minstrelsy.
Until I read.
Well, but think about that. How could you not make the connection? But it's because of the context.
Right.
I mean, they're obviously wearing blackface.
Right.
They're obviously dressed like cannibals. And in any other place, if you saw that, you'd be offended.
Yeah.
But context can, so, nothing is cut and dry. Context is kind of magical.
And I think, based on what you said, that we're going to find that this is going to continue.
Yeah.
We are going to see this, maybe suddenly, maybe not so suddenly, but we're going to see this as long as there is entertainment out there, and as long as we are participating in that entertainment, I believe.
This is a tradition that is based in racism.
Okay.
And, that's part of the American character. Race and racism are always that's what helped build this country, and will either be, something that we're going to always have to deal with. And it doesn't mean that it has to be ignoring it, acting like it's a post-racial society because of Obama. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's not reality. So I mean, this is something that is going to continue for some reasons. I mean, some of the stuff is funny. I mean, what Tyler Perry does malapropisms, meaning he gets words wrong. And sometimes that's funny, and that's something that comes out of this tradition. I mean, some things last because they can still be funny. Some things last because they remind us of our history in an important way. Sometimes they're lasting because people are bringing it up to make people uncomfortable on purpose,
But then there's some parts of the tradition that are dying, and for example, blacks wearing blackface.
Yeah, outside New Orleans,
outside
you don't
New
see
Orleans,
it.
you don't see it anymore. It's just gone, which is a good thing.
I'm going to ask my students, having sat through the conversation, does anybody have anything they want to ask or want to say at this point? Recognizing this is somewhat new. All right, Ted, if you stand up, please. Take the mic. Thank you, sir.
My name is Tedrick Thurman, and I was asking, what year did you all started to write the book?
I think it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, it took about 4 years. In part because there was so much research to do.
Yeah.
To do something when you're dealing with the 1800s, you have to look at old newspapers, and to even understand what these shows were like, you had to read reviews of them, sometimes look at court documents that say, somebody was suing somebody and then they're listing their assets, and that you would see, oh, they own this theater troupe, they did this. So it's very hard to research it, so it takes a really long time. But it was also a lot to think about. And we also go so far, since we go to contemporary times, we had to watch probably 1,000 hours of television and movies. I mean, I watched the whole Amos and Andy, which was, 25 hours, or longer, about 40 hours, yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Law.
My name is Kemontavious Lowe.
One question I want to ask is, how do you react to a bad review on this particular book?
Okay.
Bad review? We haven't had any really bad reviews yet. We had some, I think we had one review that was kind of mixed, and I just thought, you know, we appreciate the attention that we're getting, and we appreciate the good things that the reviewer is saying.
I mean, it's, you know, what's really, it's okay for somebody to completely disagree with you if they really pay attention to what you're doing. Like if they
understand the book.
If they understand it and they disagree, that's fine. I mean, what you don't want to see somebody comment on something if they haven't read the book. You don't want someone to put this down without having done it. But anybody who reads it and thinks about it and completely disagrees with us, that's fine. I mean, you got to be a little bit thick-skinned. It always hurts to get somebody saying something bad about you, but it's, you know, that's helpful too.
Yeah.
My name is Isaiah Rosebud, and I just wanted to know, is the 4 years the average time for a book like this, like the research for a book like this?
I'm an editor, so I acquire books all the time, and sometimes it does take 4 years, but I think most of the time it's less. Most of the time, when I sign up a book which has already been developed somewhat, it'll take the author a year or two to finish it.
But a lot of books that are written about like old times or old history are done by people who are writing it for an academic press. Like this is a book that came out to be in regular bookstores, but a lot of people do this kind of research as part of their PhD in college, you know, and that kind of stuff can be 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people who are doing this kind of research for school, it can be a lot longer than 4 years.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you. I really do appreciate you coming by today and being on our inaugural show of Best of the Best. And hopefully we'll have you back, because I'm sure you're going to write another one.
All right.
And we'll be looking forward to it.
Well, we wish you the best with Best of the Best.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you all.